Okay, I think we're ready to get started. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Veriff webinar. My name's Chris Hooper. I'm Director of Brand here at Veriff. I look after a lot of our sort of thought leadership, and you would have seen me presenting some of these before. Today, we're talking about our latest piece of thought leadership, actually, which is our Veriff Fraud Industry Pulse Survey. Now, just to give you guys a little bit of context about what this is a survey that we run. We ran it for the first time last year. This is the second iteration of it. We survey fraud professionals, senior fraud decision makers. So these are folks with job titles like head of fraud, head of compliance, head of risk, and so on. And they are at companies that have 100 or more employees or have an annual revenue of over $100 million. So it gives a very good sort of sample size of what's happening in the enterprise space around the world of fraud. And I should say, too, this is a global survey, but we focused on 3 of our key markets. And those 3 markets are the US, the UK, and Brazil. Nothing more to say about those, really. We don't favor them over any others, but they're just where we seem to be very, very active, where lots of our customers are active. And the folks in the survey here were primarily drawn from financial services and gambling, which is the 2 sort of the big industries that we look at. As well as many others, obviously, but that's where the bulk of respondents seem to come from. You'll notice at the top of that slide there, it says from insights to action. So as well as us conveying some of the key findings of the survey and some of the things that we think you need to know in order to do your jobs, there are going to be some practical takeaways as well. And I've got a couple of guests on with me to sort of help run through what they are. And I'll introduce you to them in a minute. I just want to quickly run over the agenda and what we're going to be talking about. The introduction is this bit right now, so we are in it. I will sort of, as I say, mention my guests, but to give a little bit of context as to what it is we're talking about. We'll go into what the growing threat of online fraud. I don't think, there's some great sort of findings from the survey there. Nothing new. I would think that this is a topic that all of you know already, that the fraud is on the rise across the globe. But there's some nuances, and I think that's the really sort of key point that I want to tease out today, that although there is a global picture, I think having the 3 different regions, countries that I mentioned earlier, allows us to really dig into the data and find out what's happening on a sort of individual country level, which is really interesting. Also, we will be looking at the AI threat. I don't think it would be a webinar about fraud without talking about AI. We seem to cover it every time we get into this, but for good reason. It's everywhere, and it seems to be something that's really top of mind with fraud professionals. We're talking about it here in a really interesting context around how it can be balanced against the sort of the rising customer expectations as well, which we'll get into. And then sort of the sections 4, 5, and 6 in there are those practical sections I mentioned at the beginning. How to build a core defense strategy, what that looks like, and then how to sort of navigate the budgeting and prioritization sort of conversations and issues that you might have internally at your business. We do have a Q&A, time for a Q&A at the end, sort of penciled in. The last couple of webinars we've had loads of questions. So there is, you can see on the screen in front of you there, a box for you to be able to do that. Just type it in. It comes through to us automatically. We've got our person behind the scenes, Trinu, who is looking after these and making sure that they get through to us. If we have time, we'll cover them. If you get them in while we're talking about something, that's almost better, actually, because it might have some relevance to what we're saying, and we can just divert straight into the question immediately. If not, we'll wait till the end. That's perfectly fine too. I think the earlier you ask the question, the higher up the list it is as well, I should say. If we don't have time to get to them, the questions are still really useful to us because we use them to formulate our future content. So if we're looking at what the subject matter should be for our next thought leadership report or our next webinar, we can take those questions as our guidance. So they are really good feedback for us, if nothing else, if we don't have time to cover them across today. Now, we do have loads to get through, so I'm very keen to introduce my guests as quickly as possible, really. My name is Chris Hooper, as I mentioned. I'm head of brand. My role at Veriff is to look after all of our thought leadership, all of our surveys, all of the kind of stuff, big reports that we push out, including this one here. And joining me today is Margit and Aaron, who are both in our account management function. Guys, do you want to introduce yourselves rather than have me do it for you? I know, Margit, if you would like to go first.
Yes, sure. Thank you, Chris. So my name is Margit. I am the Associate Account Manager here at Veriff. I'm based in Tallinn in Estonia, and I'm very excited to share this webinar with all of you. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Okay. And how about you, Aaron?
Yes, Chris. Hey, everyone. My name is Aaron Hilling. I am a Senior Account Manager at Veriff. I'm located in Southern California, down near San Diego area. Excited to be joining you all and navigate any questions that you have, and excited to kick it off.
Nice, nice. I say we've got the whole globe covered today as well. I think, Aaron, you also cover Latin America to a certain extent as well with some of your customers, I know. So we've got something for everyone, I think, here today. And let's get started, I think, with this growing threat of online fraud, right? I mean, this is, again, I mentioned at the beginning, there's no surprises here. This is something that is consistent throughout all of our thought leadership that we've been publishing. But online fraud is on the rise. I think we've seen the question we put to our fraud experts in this survey was, have you seen an increase in the last 12 months? You can see across, the answers in all three of those countries were pretty consistent, actually. There's not much deviation between them. But it's a growing concern. I think that there are a number of sort of stats that sort of sit behind this as well, which is that that there's a growing sort of AI threat to all of this, where I think Brazil was leading the way here. 69% of business leaders had seen an increase in AI-powered fraud, which is interesting. That number was down to 61% in the UK, actually. So there is quite a greater variance when it comes to sort of the type of fraud and the types of attacks that people are seeing. But it's also worth pointing out that there is kind of a revenue implication to this as well. I think that sometimes it's really difficult to quantify a percentage. It can be a bit abstract. 32% of respondents said that they had a revenue hit at their business between 3 and 5%, which is, I think in and of itself a good data point. But there's a bit more to it than that. In Brazil, 20% of businesses lost at least 10% of their revenue to online fraud, which is an incredibly high number. In the US, that was 13%, and in the UK, that was 9%. But when we convert that percentage into a dollar value, it's even more of a startling statistic, I think, really, because a 10% loss for a business that is turning over $100 million a year, which was the minimum threshold to be involved in this survey, that's a $10 million loss annually to fraud, which is just staggering. It blows my mind, some of these numbers that we're sort of seeing here. And I think it's worth pointing out that the types of fraud that businesses were encountering were different as well. So although the value is quite high when it's sort of taken cumulatively, in Brazil, we were seeing malware being the top fraud that was most encountered. Document fraud was second. Malware was also top in the UK and the US, I should say. But in the UK, impersonation fraud was second. And authorized fraud and impersonation fraud were joint second in the US as well. So what the point of this, I think, is to say that fraud is increasing. It's having a real bottom line impact on businesses, and the types of fraud there's a huge variance across all of the regions that we're looking at. Margie, I'm going to come to you here first, actually, if that's okay, because I think what we're sort of saying is that this report is highlighting that there's fraud is a growing concern across all three regions. What is it that you think is kind of driving the increase in this feeling?
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Chris. Of course. So from the data that we can see that the level of authorized fraud, so fraud where basically verification is done for the purpose of the recruitment, this has grew dramatically over the course of the year, and especially in the US. So e-commerce platforms have become a prime target for fraudsters, surpassing even the financial services as the industry most impacted by the authorized fraud. So with millions of dollars transacted daily between merchants and the customers, the rewards for fraudsters are very substantial. So also the UK and EU as well are also facing some struggles in the impersonation fraud while navigating the stringent AI and data protection regulations. So we can oftentimes see a lot of impersonation fraud coming in for the gaming industry as users try to bypass the system, pretending to be someone else and get the prices for themselves, of course. And Latin America, of course, as mentioned also, is experiencing the sharpest rise in the fraud cases, including synthetic identity fraud and fraud as a service platforms, so calling for multi-layered prevention strategies. And I myself believe this may be influenced by transaction volumes, as well as the payment channels and the region's diverse financial products. So users use AI's benefits to create deepfakes and manipulate the documents. So with that all being said, the latest trends of AI have been increasing not only in everyday life, but also in fraud capabilities. And for example, growing adoption of the digital identity wallets, they do enhance convenience for the users. However, it also introduces new attack vectors that businesses must address.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're completely right there. And I think, Aaron, I'll turn to you for the next part to follow on from that, I suppose, if that's okay. So how can businesses better prepare to face these kind of increasing fraud risks? And I said, well, what strategies should they be bringing in, I think, to mitigate, especially the sort of impersonation fraud and document fraud, which that's a problem that feels very solvable. What do you think?
Yeah, definitely, Chris. I think for businesses, to prepare to face these increasing fraud risks, there's a lot of different paths they can explore, particularly with various strategies. By adopting more of a proactive, multi-layer approach, this allows businesses to get ahead of this, mitigate those various fraud attacks. Specifically for impersonation fraud, document fraud, strategies should zero in on IDV tools that analyze patterns or anomalies in their user behaviors, biometric checks like facial recognition, liveliness checks to confirm, that real person behind the lens, so to speak, and other layers like country registry checks. We've seen take some good effect in places like LATAM for our users out there navigating CPF. Just another layer to be able to validate that end user. We've seen a lot of clients take this approach from different angles, though. I think that's why Veriff's solution is so unique, because you can tailor them specifically to your fraud risk levels, your compliance needs, and often, and more importantly, those use cases, right? So for example, I work with a logo that services global solutions. With that comes various thresholds to adapt with region requirements, right? And so as we explore that, as we've kind of already highlighted, based on the region, that entry can be a lot lower entry, a lot less risk, and require more of a simple approach to protect revenue, user experience. While we have other regions, particularly LATAM, Brazil being a great call out there, where they have a lot more stringent compliance and regulations that go far beyond just the user experience. And so having a multi-layer approach where you're encompassing a 365 prevention tool that is not only meeting your fraud needs, but then also meeting those needs that are accustomed to that specific region, compliance-wise, et cetera. So a lot of different avenues that businesses can take to help prevent various types of frauds. Really comes down to just aligning with, that account manager, that program team that you work with at Veriff, and diving deeper into how we can tweak those decision profiles and particular use cases.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer, and I think there's probably another sort of ingredient, if you like, to sort of add into the mix here, which is around rising customer expectations. This is something that we've seen across our thought leadership over the last couple of years. Actually, we did a survey of end users, of consumers last year, and that number sort of was validating what we see here. Which is that 76% of fraud professionals reported that their customers are now demanding more robust fraud capabilities. And this is really interesting because, fraud is traditionally seen as kind of a cost center, something that is a cost of doing business, if you like. But actually what we're saying with this is that fraud can be a customer acquisition strategy. If you can show off that you've got a really robust set of fraud prevention mechanisms in place, you're more likely to attract new customers to you, because customers are more discerning now. They're starting to look at what a business has been through. If there's been some negative publicity, for example, or something like that, that's going to be very off-putting for consumers, especially in that sort of space where it's financial services, e-commerce, and things like that, where sort of potentially large amounts of money are changing hands. And I think that within this number here, 76%, this is an averaged out number. Brazil actually was the highest here. This was up at 79%, which is that's the highest demand of consumers. So that's a really interesting number, I thought, and shows that Brazilian end users are very, very demanding of high fraud capabilities. That may be a result of them it being more fraud in the past in Brazil. We just sort of don't know. We didn't sort of dig that deep. But it's potentially problematic if companies are sort of failing to meet the security expectations, and then they do risk sort of losing customers to this. And I suppose the questions that come from this are what businesses can do to meet their customer demands, I suppose. I think the most obvious one that Aaron was just pointing to there was investing in the best fraud prevention technology and having a really sort of rounded and holistic strategy to sort of help you stay as safe as possible, keep your business or platform as safe as possible, plus keep your users as safe as possible, make sure their data's safe and everything else. But also making that experience kind of seamless for users as well. So they not how much friction are you sort of sprinkling into the process, I suppose, that you're asking, is the point there. And then also a third point around educating customers on fraud awareness as well, I think is really, really important. And around this point, I'd just like to bring you back in, Aaron, if that's okay, because it's very, very clear to me that customer demand for fraud prevention is, or robust fraud practices is rising across all three of the regions that we're looking at here. What is it that you think is really behind this shift in customer expectations, would you say?
Yes, great call out. As we look at the current climate, we're very much in a digital world that is driven by consumer feedback, buy-in, and sentiment. And so as we see this shift that is taking place in these regions, driving that consumer impact, their push for better fraud prevention, it's kind of a combination of perfect storms as I look at it, Chris. Factors such as fraud incidences are spiking globally, from phishing scams to account takeovers. AI threats, as we've highlighted, deepfakes is really become predominant in the fraud space, while more common known high-profile data breaches that we'll see online keep security top of mind for our end users. But with that, we've also seen an explosion on the digital front in transactions, whether it's online banking, e-commerce, remote services, and just people's identities and data more exposed than ever, Chris. They're not just worried so much about losing money at this point. It's more around that reassurance from the businesses that value their safety, value their image, value their trust. That's where the consumer shift is really taking shape, and we've seen that, with various clients of ours. It's also fueled by growing awareness, thanks to media, education, just making trust and security almost non-negotiable for any brand that's out there. For customers, a company that skips on fraud prevention risk losing loyalty fast. We actually had a client who was seeing a large drop in user base due to sentiment around account exposures, data security. We implemented a multi-layered fraud approach with Veriff, and they were able to see enough of a spike in their CSAT and user base growth in the next few months that there was a direct correlation to their stock increase associated with that, right? And so what stockholder doesn't want that, right? But in seriousness, though, consumers are more alive and vocal than ever. So with so many fraud types, it's instrumental to create the best user experience, with trust now playing a key role and ultimately driving revenue is what we've assessed.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And that stock price one is really interesting, actually. That's a really, really, really good call out, because I think that, where negative press brings the stock price down, the alternative, of course, is the positive news takes it up. And if you could be shown to be sort of putting the most stringent measures in place, I think that's definitely a positive for any business. Margie, over to you. How do you sort of see businesses sort of meeting these raising expectations, I suppose, especially when it comes to that sort of balancing act that we have to do between fraud prevention and the user experience? How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, so the threat is there all the time, and in fact, it's only rising. But however, so are our defenses and systems. So by combining the robust IDV technology and solution with a human expertise, we can beat the fraudsters and build a secure and convenient user experience as well. So our experts at Veriff say that it pays to create a so-called fraud prevention ecosystem. So flexible, and as Aaron also mentioned before, the multi-layered stack. So that brings in the biometrics, IDV, cross-linking, and so many other solutions to keep ahead of the fraudsters. So at Veriff, no solution is one size fits all. So therefore, we offer multiple different features and add-ons, which can play a tremendous part on further fraud prevention and also detection for the businesses. So I'd also like to bring some example in, as Aaron brought some example from his side. So one of our customers had reported more than 50% of a decrease in fraud after implementing our velocity abuse feature, which is quite simple feature and prevents users coming back to the platform many times. So, whenever the businesses want to prevent that, we are here to help you. So when talking about how businesses can themselves improve their fraud capabilities, financial institutions are adopting AI-powered anti-fraud solutions to enhance their fraud prevention efforts. So these solutions can analyze the customer data, also identify the patterns, and also detect the differences in real time. So this enabling companies to respond quickly to any possible threats. So to summarize, do invest in a good IDV technology, especially a provider. So not only do we take over from your side and offer our expertise, we can also make sure to educate you on our fraud awareness so that you can go back to your customers and make sure they know what are the trends and how to prevent any malicious threats against them. So remember, the awareness of the fraud attempts is the first step to the actual protection.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think it leads nicely into the next section, actually, which is around this AI piece and how it is kind of a double-edged sword in the fraud world. I mean, I think, we're seeing that there has been an increase in the use of AI attacks across the board. This is in all regions. This is an averaged out number across all of them, actually. But again, Brazil was the highest here, so which is an interesting one, and that was up at 69%. So there is an incredible amount of AI-driven fraud around at the moment. I don't think again that's new information necessarily, but that's only going to go in one direction as well. I think that AI tools for fraudsters are easy to access, they're cheap, easy to use, and maybe the main point is that they're easy to scale as well. So we're very much seeing what we're calling sort of fraud as a service type industry developing at the moment, which is a slightly worrying concern. However, AI is also being used on the other side of the fence, which is to protect businesses as well. And 64% of businesses are currently using AI in some form or another to fight fraud within their organization, with a further 20% planning to utilize AI in the coming year. So that's very reassuring. I think it's worth pointing out that Brazil, as we mentioned, has the highest amount of AI attacks, but is also leading the way in AI adoption, which is again really interesting, and I think those numbers probably correlate. The US follows close behind, the UK slightly behind the US. A follow-on question to all of this was the types of what it was that fraud teams were using AI for. Pattern detection and risk analysis, as Margit mentioned in her answer, then was the most common answer in all three regions actually. Automated customer verification was highest in Brazil and the UK, and then behavioral analysis for fraud prevention was one that was second place in the US. Obviously, this is we're talking about how things are being used now, but there are a number of challenges and opportunities around AI-powered fraud prevention, which I think it's worth us exploring a little bit more. Margit, I'm going to stay with you if that's okay. So AI seems to be playing a major role in sort of both fraud attacks and fraud prevention. Let's start with the first part of that for you, if that's okay. So how are you seeing, or how are the customers that you're working with seeing fraudsters using AI to their advantage?
Yeah, of course. So as you mentioned also, the technological advances are making the artificial intelligence and deep fakes cheaper and more readily to use by hand. So everyone has an access now to the AE much easier than it used to be. So they can enable fraudsters to impersonate a person's likeness from their physical appearance, as well as to their voice and also mannerism, and also, believe it or not, their texting style. So for example, we have deep fakes, right? So with this technology, fraudsters are able to do the face swaps. So basically swapping the face with the person on the document. And also what they're now doing more is they're using the lip sync, trying to pass the active liveness. We also have to be aware of the generative AI. So fraudsters could gain the access to the thousands of different IDs, generate a random face that matches the characteristics of the person's name, and place it on a document of their choosing. And as mentioned before, AI is a growing trend. And here at Veriff, we do make sure to always be two steps ahead of fraudsters and their malicious attempts. And as you mentioned, Chris, we do also use AI's advantages to prevent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of those things you mentioned there around sort of lip syncing and face swaps and so on are things that we commonly see in our trying to get through our fraud defenses, and they don't succeed. It's one of those things that we are very, very good at, using our sort of liveness and video within our solution to sort of root those out. Aaron, I guess a question to you here as well, which is kind of the logical sort of extension of the thought, I suppose. So with sort of AI adoption in fraud prevention growing, what are some of the challenges that business face when it comes to implementing some of those solutions?
Yes, absolutely. AI is a game changer, no doubt about it. So businesses, they're often grappling with different factors, whether it's cost for solutions, being proactive, the proper risk signals that mitigate AI, deepfake, impression attacks, however you want to define that. You also have to navigate data privacy laws like GDPR, or if you're in California like myself, we have CCPA. So these all add an additional layer demanding strict compliance on how customer info is handled, or even using biometric dynamics, Chris.
Yeah.
Which I believe we are discussing a bit later in our Pulse survey. So I'll hold off on that piece.
Sure.
But these factors are one of the reasons, that we've established here at Veriff, the Veriff Trust Center, just giving our clients that ease of mind that we are dedicated to reliability with the highest level of privacy and information security requirements. Being able to balance accuracy, cost, and user experience while preventing fraud is a tightrope, that businesses need to walk. And this is why partnering with the right adaptable fraud tools in place is so crucial for your business. Digital documents add another complexity against AI attacks as well. We've seen a lot of this take shape in the Brazilian market. And one of the reasons, too, we've seen this take shape or more advantages for fraudsters, particularly in Brazil, is because oftentimes, based on the industry, there is a regulatory requirement that we must accept digital IDs as a form of identification, right? Mm-hmm. So we've had to adjust, obviously, our layers of prevention and how we counter these deepfakes, and have come up with some awesome solutions and continue to adapt. I think that's the beauty of AI. You're always having to adapt because it's ever changing. But at Veriff, I've had to navigate, several clients from various industries. The feedback we're often receiving is our ability, like I just said, to be proactive, to shift with that AI climate. We have an industry unique liveliness check and various other threshold signals mixed with our hybrid approach to IDV continues to prove effective as we see this AI take shape. And so we'll continue to keep our finger to the pulse around that, but definitely something that businesses need to start being more cognitive around and start adding into their fraud prevention strategies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this kind of, you mentioned, you referenced biometrics in there, but this identity verification piece as well is something that is, it's at the core of a fraud defense strategy, effectively. It's one of those things that, we often say at Veriff that you need this kind of multi-layered, sort of holistic solution to fighting fraud, because there are so many different risks these days. And we've identified some of them today, and the AI one being the most sort of prevalent at the moment, I suppose. But at the heart of that strategy, the real core of what we're talking about here is identification, verification, and biometrics. If you can identify your customers and you know that they're genuine, that's half the battle. There are other things that you need to worry about, of course, but that's it's a big step in the right direction. And what we sort of say at Veriff is that there are 3 questions that we need to be able to answer, and that's number one for any business needs to be answered that has sort of remote employees or remote customers. Question number 1 is, are your customers a real person? That's the obvious thing, and identity verification can sort of answer that question for you. The second one is, can that person be trusted? Is this person of value to your business or potentially harmful to your business? A fraudster being the latter, a genuine customer being the former. Identity verification can do that. We can sort of show the various places that this person's logged into before and everything else. And then the third question is, can those 2 questions be answered on an ongoing basis? So every time somebody comes back to an account to re-log in, can we definitely say it's them? Can we definitely say it's a legitimate person? And that's when the biometrics piece comes in for that sort of re-authentication piece, if you like. So this is a really sort of relevant point. I think all businesses need to answer those 3 questions. And it's really encouraging to me that 83% of businesses that we surveyed have adopted identity verification software and/or biometrics into their risk-based setup authentication system. So that's a really high number. That's much higher than when we did this survey a year ago. It's increased by about between 10 and 15%, I think. So it's really growing, which is great. And then even more positive news is that 81% plan to increase their dependence on the technology in the next year or so. So that's the sort of the positives, if you like. That lots of businesses out there are using this already, and if they don't, they plan to do so. It's really interesting to me as well, actually, that it's the US leading the way in identity verification adoption. Followed by the UK, and Brazil came in at 76%. And then on the future plan side of things, it was flipped on its head. So Brazilian businesses plan to increase their use of IDV are up at 85%. So you can kind of see, although they may be lagging behind a little bit there is our sort of plans for them to catch up. And as I mentioned, there's, why is it that they're so critical in fighting fraud? I think I mentioned those 3 questions that we kind of hold up against ourselves. And I think that Veriff is maybe the best place of our competitors to answer those 3 questions for businesses. But really, it's all about reducing fraudulent transactions, improving customer trust, and sort of compliance with regulations. They're the areas that we can sort of offer the most help in, I suppose. Aaron, I'm going to come to you for the first question on this section. How is it exactly that identity verification and biometrics can help in building customer trust? I think it's quite a big question there. And what are some of the sort of challenges that you've sort of seen sort of companies facing in adopting these technologies?
Yes, Chris, definitely a broad question there. Let me see if I can tackle this a little bit more narrowed. We've seen ID verification and biometrics help build customer trust, through various tools that we've implemented, like facial scans, liveliness checks. Really, at the end of the day, just offering a secure, frictionless way to prove, who's on the other end of that transaction. Consumers, they feel safer knowing their accounts are locked down with tech that's tough to spoof, while at the same time, businesses can cut fraud losses and offer a great, easy cost entry solution post-user onboarding. It's kind of a win-win that signals reliability and trust on both sides, right? But adopting, it's not always smooth. It's not, the easiest processes at times, adapting to your use cases, your risk levels, etc. Privacy concerns, data retention, as we previously mentioned, how it's stored, shared, compliance regulations, and then also inclusivity matters. Companies must ensure that these tools work for everyone, right? From our tech-savvy users to those that are more in low bandwidth areas and various audience gaps. Call out there, how I service a Brazilian market is a lot different than how I may service a Peru market. Lower cost of entry, different types of user bases, volumes, etc. Right? A lot of factors play into that. So Chris, just diving into the post onboarding piece a bit, what I love about our biometric solutions outside of the above is it often unlocks other layers of user trust and low cost of entry to meet companies' compliance requirements while still mitigating manual layers. And so what does that mean, right? So one step deeper, I'll give you two client examples, that we've partnered with, particularly with biometric solutions, and how that's helped solve the various pain points that they've come across, right? So the first company, this was a revenue-driven initiative. The company's volumes and use case within the financial sector, they had a department that was specifically dedicated to user account experiences. We're talking password resets, phone number changes, etc.
Yeah.
What we did is we introduced a post-IDV non-doc selfie solution. This was queued based on the above user request, hence automating their previous manual tasks, and department allowed leadership to reshift that previous personnel into more key business components and provided a more trackable, non-friction user experience as their users made updates, further preventing fraud over the use of that customer or that user lifespan, right? All in all, saving in the overhead in the end as a much lower cost of entry post onboarding with biometrics, right? So that was one area where we came in really trying to address how to create a better user experience, a more efficient one, while still having the appropriate internal dynamics to be able to support those users and have the thresholds in place to be able to track how those activities took shape. The second example is more user-based, right? So a client that operates in our gaming industry with high volume money transactions, they were facing a lot of user sentiment pressure and feedback around account takeovers, their data privacy, and really at the end of the day, ensuring that their activities and their money transactions were safe. Our client needed a frictionless yet accurate solution to give their users ease of mind, while also allowing the company to add compliance and fraud layers within. So by taking these steps, they had a chance to implement our biometric authentication feature within and queue that up at different life cycles with their consumers. And by doing so, they saw their user reviews take a strong spike across their various apps. And they also saw a lot more consumer buy-in at the volume level based on the reviews that they were seeing of the trust that they had established, right? So in both cases, we're creating a better user experience. We're creating a less frictionless method of entry for these users, and still preventing fraud, staying compliant, and having, which I love, data to be able to track at the end of the day and understand those different aspects of the user cycle. So lots of powerful ways that you can shape, whether it's IDV, biometrics, or even some of our other tools that we offer here at Veriff. Once again, it really comes down to leaning on that subject matter expert, that account manager at Veriff, understanding your use case and what you're trying to solve taking our feedback alongside that and shaping it into an effective fraud prevention and user-friendly experience tool.
Yeah, 100% agree with you there, Aaron. I think that's the key thing, that kind of the adaptability, flexibility of our solution, I guess, and how it can sort of fit to any customer use case. And it actually ties in with a question that we've had in the chat, actually. And I just, again, a shout out to sort of get these in as soon as you think of them, because we'll try to work them into the conversation where we can. One of the ones I think is really interesting, actually, we've talked a lot about identity verification in a digital setting, which is the primary use case for us, we'll be completely honest. But the question is it how easy is it to do this in a physical setting? And some of the answers that, some of the examples, sorry, that are in the question are around, it's largely around looking at lenders, for example, such as physical bank branches, car dealerships, and things like that. I know that the Veriff tool has been adapted to physical settings a number of different ways, actually. We've had an example with a retailer over in Europe, in Switzerland, that essentially has a kind of a tablet that the same digital process that would go through if you were an online customer. The tablet on a little platform allows you to do so in store. So you can go through the same process. You have the selfie taken, you scan your passport, your document in a way that you would do if you were an online customer, and it's kind of replicating that online experience in the physical environment. And I know this has been used in a retail setting. I know that it's been used in dealerships for insurance and in the marine industry in the US, where people are buying boats and making some high value purchases in person as well there. So this is definitely something that can be applied to a physical setting with the right sort of setup there. It's essentially the same product that you're buying. It's just how it's presented to the customer is a slightly different way. Margaret, I had a question for you, just to follow on from what Aaron was saying there. Actually, IDV adoption is high and growing, which is great, and continuing to grow. What are some of the best practices that businesses should adopt when building out their IDV capabilities? I think we had Aaron there talking about the implementation piece, but I'm guessing there's a next stage after that, where they've been using IDV for a year or so and they want to sort of optimize it to get the most from it. Well, what are some of the best practices that you've seen on that respect?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm just going to repeat also a little bit of what Aaron mentioned. So different industries do need to be aware of different attacks, as well as different solutions to prevent this. So once we know what are the needs of the company and the use cases, we know exactly what measures to use to offer the best solutions for these specific customers. However, overall, by employing the AI-driven analytics, implementing the multi-factor authentication, and also aligning with the global compliance requirements, businesses can stay ahead of the fraud trends. So collaboration across industries, regions, and governments is crucial to sharing intelligence and fighting fraud collectively.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you there, Margaret. And we've actually had another question, which is kind of also relevant here, I suppose, that we can work in, which is, let me just quickly put it up here so I can read it for you. So do you think there is a value in banks and lenders, for example, asking existing customers who may have been customers for a number of years to pass IDV biometric tests? It's often easy to do this at the onset of a customer journey, but do you think they would see any pushback from long-standing customers who have never been asked to do this before? That's a really good question. Aaron, do you want to take this one? It feels like something that was kind of talking to your answer that you just gave a moment ago there.
Yeah, let's do it. Happy to jump in on Simon's questions there. And then I did see Fabrizio's question come through. I think we're addressing that one next, Fabrizio, so bear with us. But Simon, back to yours. Great call out here. I get to work with a lot of our strategic fintech providers that would be applicable for this exact question. My feedback would be, based on our client experiences, it is a need at this point in the game for your users to have additional tools of fraud prevention, especially in the fintech space, due to the amount of different frauds that we see. And I'm happy to connect with your account manager and dive a little deeper in with you as well, Simon. But when we look at how we can engage past users, maybe some of our legacy users that aren't familiar with these processes or this new age technology, so to speak, communication has always been key, right? Ensuring that we have the proper messaging out to these users, ensuring that we're implementing. At the end of the day, we're trying to create a better experience for them, a safer, trusted environment for them. we do a great job at Veriff at walking our users as they're going, right? We have the integration within your flow or app, so to speak. We can also customize and white label that out according to your needs to really give it that frictionless experience. So as those users are getting prompted, there's a lot of great messaging that is getting put into place. There's a lot of coaching as they go through our flow that allows them to understand what is needed, you know, whatever their skill set or technology gap level may be at. And so what we have found is having that initial layer of IDV is key for their future success when it comes to fraud prevention methods. Majority of our clients are shifting from just an onboarding methodology where let's understand who's entering our ecosystem, who's on our environment, to more how do we keep our users safe once they're a part of that environment, right? And that's where we've talked about biometrics, some of these other additional less frictionless non-doc verification tools that will tie back to that initial session that we've captured. And really what we're creating is kind of that case study, that case file for that end user that we can track over their lifespan. We can understand different changes that they've made, different transactions that have taken shape, and have that in a centralized area or facet for them. Ultimately, we do want to be concerned with your user experience, though, and ensure that we are not a hindrance in their overall end focus, right? Especially in your world, the loan is their focus. Verification is the last of their concern. Continue to communicate and express and show we value you. We want to implement and continue to make improvements to how we protect your identity, your assets, etc. This is just another layer that we've taken on to show and facilitate that. And then from there, you know, CSATs, you know, getting different types of user surveys, you know, always a positive on that side as well. But hopefully that answers your question, Simon. And I'm not sure if anybody else on the team has any additional feedback.
Yeah, I think I just add to that. I think one of the, I mean, I don't want to bombard you guys with data. I know we've had a lot in this presentation already. Our annual fraud report that we released back in January showed that the fastest rising fraud was what we call assailant in the middle. This is when essentially somebody takes over an existing account for nefarious purposes. So they you know, the account is actually genuine, set up by a genuine person, but is being used for fraudulent means. So I think, Simon, there is really a need to re-verify customers whenever you get the chance to, and even if they've been with you for many, many years. I think there is probably an education piece in there. Again, another piece of research we showed said that you know, as 80% of consumers preferred to go through an identity verification piece if it meant their data was safe and the platform that they were using was going to be secure. So I think, you know, I think customers want this. I think they want to feel safe. They want to know that you know, they are being looked after, that their data is being looked after. And if they're not, it does increase the risk that you might lose them as a customer, I think. So I would definitely sort of recommend getting as many customers through as possible through the identity verification process, because every customer that you don't is a potential fraud weak spot. I think that's the sort of the thing to keep in mind with this. So some great questions there. And I don't want to throw us off too far off track. I know we've had another one around why companies are still resistant to adopt strong fraud prevention tools. And I think actually the next slide might deal with that. I think we're talking about budgeting and prioritization here, which is obviously one of the main obstacles, I suppose, to overcome when it comes to bringing in a new piece of software or a new piece of kit into the business. The question that we put to fraud professionals was, does fraud prevention receive the appropriate level of budget allocation at your business's highest level at the C-suite? And as you can see, it was pretty uniform answers across the US and the UK, with Brazil quite far ahead, actually. And I think this is a positive. I think that we're sort of seeing that the businesses do take this seriously. The follow-on question to all of this was, do you think they could do more? And the a really high percentage of all the businesses said, yeah, absolutely, we could. And I think that's the challenge with fraud, is that no matter how much you throw at it, there's always going to be something around the corner that you have to prepare for. So it's really a balance of the cost versus the effectiveness of the solution, I think, here. And Margit, I think this is a really good time to bring you back in, actually, because you're quite the expert on this stuff. What do you see as the biggest barrier to investing in more in fraud prevention? Is it a matter of cost versus that sort of perceived effectiveness, or is it something else entirely?
Yeah, sure. So I would say, from my experience, the budget is certainly one of the main barrier for investing in a good fraud prevention. However, it is very important to note that having a fraud attack can cost the businesses 10 times more than the actual cost of the prevention of that exact attack. So there's also a question of the effectiveness, as Chris, you mentioned. So how can businesses be sure that a certain IDV solution will in fact work effectively for their use case? So here's where I would once more emphasize what we have already been talking about here, how important it is to know the exact use case of the company and to add or expertise to support customers with their individual needs. And also, let's talk about trust a bit. So businesses may find it hard to trust certain providers due to the historical bad experiences, or perhaps someone had spoken negatively about a certain service. So this is why we always recommend for the customers to test our service firsthand and see for themselves how effective it is in fact.
Yeah, absolutely. And Aaron, I think there's, we're talking about like the practical takeaways from this session here. I think there's one around this point, right, around the budgeting case particularly. With some businesses feeling there is room for improvement in their fraud prevention budgets, how can individuals, if you are working within a fraud role, a compliance role, how can you make a stronger case to secure more resources, would you say?
Yeah, great question, Chris. For those that fall within that applicable realm, I think what we've seen take shape is kind of twofold, right? You have the user experience and then you have the C-suite experience, right? So making a strong case to win over both, particularly on the C-suite level, which is going to get you that line item written off. Businesses, they need hard numbers, compelling stories. And I think that's where on both sides, all the hard numbers, the data is showing in the fraud instances versus the compelling stories where you have user instances wanting to be part of that trust circle with your brand and ensure that, there's that unison in place. But taking a step back, starting with ROI, just comparing the cost of fraud losses that your entity is seeing, think stolen funds, legal fees, reputational hits, in a very consumer-driven, voice-driven market. We've seen plenty of brands, maybe not all fraud related, but that have shifted overnight due to that consumer sentiment and feedback. So it's now more crucial than ever to be cognizant of these different things. But outside of that price tag, prevention like IDV, biometric tools that offer more of a multi-layered approach, they're key. And I think often show more incentives to your C-suite to be able to have that 360 dynamic versus just more of a, let's just check the box and say that we have a tool in place, right? Showing how fraud dents customers' retention, how strong defenses can keep users loyal, tying it back to compliance. Regulators are cracking down. Fines for weak security are starting to really sting, across various industries. And so it's almost a no-brainer to have a solution in place. But then when you bring in the competition, in your particular industry, highlight those case studies of rivals and what they're doing, how they've slashed some of those fraud rates, how it's been effective for them. With this, it's just going to allow you to have bigger budgets, gain additional market share, shift some of those focuses and strategies into other areas of your businesses. But lastly, just painting a picture where investing now prevents that bigger mess down the line. It's about protecting that profit and protecting those users at the end of the day. So shifting fraud tools from just a line item to an intimate part of their business pillar is key. I think the beauty of all this, though, Chris, is that, with Veriff coming alongside of you to solve all these and craft the right success stories for your brand and users, this has been proven by some of the largest brands in the world that trust us to create this and come alongside them kind of as that subject matter expert and solutions provider, right? And so I would just say, with Veriff, one of the things we like to say is, don't trust us, test us. And that what that simply means is just that. Let us come alongside you. Let us help create that story. Let us help create that business use case, and show you how we've had an effective impact on other brands and industries within our ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make some really good points in there, actually. I think some of the the potential cost of doing nothing far outweighs the cost of any solution that you choose, whether it's Veriff or anyone else, actually, for that matter. But it's one of those things that the intangible cost, I guess, as well, that reputational damage that you might suffer from having some sort of fraudulent breach is potentially devastating and has wiped out businesses. So it's really something that I think should be top of mind for folks, and well, I would like to think an easy argument for them to win when they do go to their C-suite looking for more money and more budget to do things as well. I'm very aware of time. I know we are kind of over already, but I want to push just this last section, which is the kind of predictions. Nearly 90% of folks, this was averaged out across all the regions, expect to see more fraud in 2025. So the picture is not changing. I think it's the US was ahead on this, but not by much. I think that the biggest concerns were much the same that we mentioned earlier on, actually. So malware, authorized fraud, document fraud in Brazil, malware impersonation fraud and authorized fraud in the UK, malware impersonation fraud and authorized fraud in the US as well. So I think it's one of those things that the picture isn't going to change too much, I don't think. So it's one of those things that we want to sort of emphasize, I guess, the need for action on this, I suppose. Margaret, just to wrap up, one last question for you. As we look ahead then to 2025 and the rest of this year, the report's predicting an increase in fraud across all of the regions. Is there any type of fraud in particular that you think will become more prominent in the future?
Yeah, sure. I think I have a couple to mention. So, of course, as we mentioned many times here, AI, especially deepfakes, is a prominent and growing threat in fraud trends. However, it is still worth mentioning that the deepfakes have some way to go to catch up with other fraud types. We also have the authorized fraud, which was also mentioned before. Both physical and digital are on the rise. So while still on a smaller proportion of overall fraud, these attacks are becoming increasingly sophisticated. So with sign up and other bonuses on offer, fraudsters have turned on multi-accounting, identity farming, and account takeover, using physical authorized attacks to drive these tactics. And in many cases, individuals are also forced to provide access to their accounts or directly involved in those fraudulent schemes. And there is also account takeover fraud, which continues to rise. So cyber criminals use stolen credentials to access accounts and also exploit them for the financial gain. So similarly, multi-accounting, where fraudsters create numerous accounts to exploit the promotions or any kind of bonuses. And also, of course, the document fraud continues to rise. So this type of fraud involves the use of the manipulated or the counterfeit documents to bypass the identity verification systems. So this is also where the AI may came into the play, and fraudsters are using this advanced technology to their advantage and also create the fake documents in just a matter of seconds.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a good point to end on. Actually, I think that the speed with which AI is developing is rightly terrifying, actually, and I think it's one of those things that that this year will sort of show us the direction this is going. I think I will say that. AI tools are and the means of using them for fraud prevention is also increasing at a rapid rate. So it's one of those things that it's just going to be more of the same, I think, for this year. We have one more slide, which is just to show off some of the big names that we work with, and you can see that is across regions that are in there. I will say too that the slides will be linked to the on-demand session that will be emailed to you when we follow up on an email with all of you guys listening after the event. So you'll be able to sort of scan through them if you want to at your own pace. I fully appreciate there was a lot of data in there, a lot of percentage points being thrown your way. So well done for sticking with it, and thank you for your participation. We had loads of questions. I think we managed to get through most of them while we were talking, and I know we've gone over time and we're sort of approaching the hour now, so everyone needs to get back to work and on with their lives. So thank you everybody for listening. Aaron and Margit, thank you so much for your insights today. They were really, really valuable, and let's say thanks for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.